My wife dressed up for another man, looked me in the eye, and said, "You've always just accepted things." I smiled and said nothing. What she didn't know was that I'd already been listening to her secrets for 3 weeks, and what I heard was going to cost her everything. My name is Gary Lang. I'm 46 years old. I've worked as head of security at Millbrook Square Mall in Columbus, Ohio for the past 11 years. Before that, I did 8 years in loss prevention for a regional retail chain. I know how to watch people. I know how to read a situation, how to spot when something's off before anyone else in the room catches it. That's the bitter irony of all this. I spent my entire career learning to see what others miss, and I spent 2 years refusing to see what was happening in my own house. Donna and I met when we were both 28. She was managing a hair salon 2 blocks from where I worked. We got married 4 years later, had Cooper, then Lily. Good years, mostly. Not perfect, nobody's are, but solid. Or so I thought. The night I'm talking about was a Thursday in late October. I came home from a 12-hour shift to find Donna at the bathroom mirror, putting on makeup at 7 in the evening. Not the everyday kind. The full treatment, foundation, liner, the works. She was wearing a dark green dress I hadn't seen before. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. Cooper was in his room doing homework. Lily was at the kitchen table with her colored pencils. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Donna didn't turn around. She just kept working on her eyeliner and said, "Out with the girls from the salon." I didn't push it. I went to the kitchen, helped Lily with her drawing, heated up the leftover pasta from the night before. But something sat heavy in my chest all through dinner. Around 8:30, Donna came downstairs with her purse over her shoulder, keys in hand. She glanced at me in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like a decision being made. "Don't wait up," she said. "I never do," I answered. She tilted her head slightly, like she was deciding whether to say something more. Then she did. Her voice was flat, almost bored. "You know what your problem is, Gary? You've always just accepted things. Maybe you should keep doing that." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled, a quiet, steady smile, and said nothing. She had no idea what I'd already put in that purse. 20 minutes earlier, while she was in the shower, I had slipped a small listening device into the inner lining of her bag. A contact of mine, Frank Doyle, had dropped it off 2 days before. Frank was an old friend from my loss prevention days, now running private investigations out of a 2-room office in Westerville. I hadn't called him on impulse. I'd been building toward this for weeks. The front door closed. I stood in the quiet kitchen for a minute, listening to Lily hum softly over her drawing. Cooper appeared in the hallway, backpack still on one shoulder. "Where'd Mom go?" "Out for a bit," I said. "You eat yet?" He shook his head. I reheated the pasta, poured him a glass of milk, and sat at the table while he ate. Normal weeknight stuff, except my hands were steadier than they'd been in months. Something had shifted. I wasn't chasing a feeling anymore. I was collecting facts, and I was very, very good at that. I called Frank the next morning while the kids were at school. It was just after 9, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes earlier. Donna had come home around midnight, said nothing, gone straight to bed. I'd heard her moving around in the dark, but pretended to be asleep. Frank picked up on the second ring. She took the bait. He asked before I could even say good morning. "She took the purse," I said, "which means she took everything in it." Frank let out a low breath. "Give it 12 hours. The device needs time to log enough audio. I'll pull the feed tonight, and we'll go from there." I'd known Frank Doyle for 16 years. We'd worked together at a regional loss prevention company back when I was still learning the ropes. He taught me most of what I know about watching people without being watched yourself. When he left to open his own firm, I wasn't surprised. Frank was the kind of man who needed to run his own operation. He was methodical, quiet, and completely without sentimentality when it came to facts. That last part was exactly what I needed right now. I went to work that afternoon and ran my shift on autopilot. Checked the overnight camera logs, briefed the morning team, walked the East Corridor twice. Millbrook Square was quiet on Fridays before noon. I appreciated the routine. It kept my hands busy while my head worked through everything I didn't want to think about, but couldn't stop. Ron Briggs stopped me near the service entrance around 2 o'clock. Ron was 47, worked the floor team on my shift. We'd been friendly for 3 years. Not close, but the kind of workplace friendly where you grab coffee together and trade complaints about management. He was leaning against the wall near the loading dock, scrolling his phone. "You look rough," he said when he saw me. "Bad night," I said. "Donna keeping you up?" He said it with a half grin, the kind that's supposed to read as harmless. I stopped walking. Something about the way he said her name, too casual, too easy, landed wrong. I filed it away without reacting. "That's the job. You notice. You don't tip your hand." Something like that, I said, and kept moving. I didn't think much more about Ron that afternoon, but I didn't forget it either. Frank called me at 8 that evening. I stepped outside onto the back porch while Donna gave Lily a bath, and Cooper finished up his homework. "You're going to want to sit down," Frank said. "I'm standing," I told him. He played me a 2-minute clip through the phone. The audio quality was clean. Frank's equipment always was. I heard Donna's voice first, then a man's. The man's name came up twice, Bryce. They talked about a restaurant, about next week, and then Donna said something that hit me like a flat tire at highway speed. She said, "He still has no idea." Honestly, Gary. Gary's useless that way. He just accepts things. There was laughter, his and hers. I stood on the back porch for a long moment after the clip ended, watching the neighbor's oak tree sway in the October wind. I thought about the way she'd looked at me the night before when she said, "You've always just accepted things." She'd been talking about more than one conversation. This wasn't a slip. This was a pattern. "There's more," Frank said. "A lot more." She mentioned money, Gary. Moving things around. "I want you to pull your joint account statements. Not online. Go to the branch in person and request paper copies. Don't use the shared computer." "Understood," I said. "And one more thing." Frank paused. "She mentioned someone at your job. Said he'd been keeping her in the loop." I didn't say anything for a moment. The oak tree kept swaying. "Did she use a name?" I asked. "Ron," Frank said quietly. I exhaled through my nose, slow and even. 11 years of security work had taught me one thing above everything else. The moment you show your hand is the moment you lose the advantage. Ron would go on thinking I didn't know. For now, that was exactly where I needed him. "Thanks, Frank," I said. "Keep the device running." I went back inside, checked on the kids, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a few minutes. The man Donna thought she was married would have been gutted by what I'd just heard. Maybe he would have confronted her that same night, or swallowed it, and said nothing for another year. I wasn't that man anymore. I reached for my phone and started searching for a family law attorney. I took Monday off work. First personal day I'd used in over a year. I told my supervisor I had a family matter to handle, which was the most honest thing I'd said out loud in weeks. First stop was the bank branch on Morse Road. I walked in, asked for a teller I didn't recognize, and requested printed statements on our joint checking and savings accounts going back 18 months. The woman behind the counter gave me a politely puzzled look. Most people just used the app, but printed everything without question. I folded the papers into my jacket and drove home. I sat in my car in the mall parking lot for 40 minutes going through the numbers. Found turned my coffee cold. 11 withdrawals over 14 months. Each one between $800 to $2,200. Each one made on days when I was working a long shift. The total came to just over $14,000. Pulled from our joint savings in amounts small enough, not to trigger an automatic alert. Donna had always handled the household finances. I trusted her completely with that. I understood now what that trust had cost me. I called Frank from the car. "She's been skimming the joint account," I told him. 14 grand over 14 months. Frank was quiet for a moment. "Screenshot and photograph every page before you put them anywhere. Then get those papers to your attorney before she gets home today." I'd already made an appointment with a family law attorney named Patricia Howe for Wednesday morning. Frank had recommended her. I didn't know her yet, but I was starting to understand that the next few weeks were going to be less about feelings and more about documentation. When I got home, Donna's car was gone. Cooper was at school, Lily at her after-school program until 4. I had the house to myself. I don't know exactly what made me walk into the garage. Call it instinct, the same thing that makes you slow down when a room feels wrong before you can explain why. I've been in that garage 100 times in the past month. But that morning I noticed something I hadn't before. The old camping gear in the back corner, 2 duffel bags and a folded tarp, was stacked differently than I remembered. One of the duffels was zipped tight and pushed behind a storage shelf in a way that looked deliberate. I pulled it out, unzipped it. Inside, a pair of men's dress shoes in a size I don't wear, a leather toiletry bag that wasn't mine, for bundles of cash held together with rubber bands. I counted it later, $3,100, and at the very bottom, a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were 2 airline tickets. Columbus to Tampa, departing December 19th. 2 names, Donna Lang and Bryce Howell. December 19th was 6 days before Christmas. I stood in the garage with that envelope in my hand and thought about Cooper asking me last week whether we were doing the tree this year. I thought about Lily picking out the ornaments she wanted from the bin in the closet. And I thought about Donna telling me at dinner 3 weeks ago that maybe we should do something different for the holidays this year. Keep it low-key. She hadn't been talking about skipping the decorations. She'd been planning her exit. I photographed everything exactly as I found it, then zipped the bag back up and put it precisely where I found it. She couldn't know I'd been in there. I needed her to feel safe for just a little while longer. That afternoon I sat with Cooper while he did his math homework, and we watched 30 minutes of a game together before dinner. Normal. Steady. I didn't let a single thing show on my face. After the kids were in bed, I called Frank and read in the names on the tickets. Bryce Howell. Frank repeated. Give me 24 hours. He called back the next morning. What he told me added a layer I hadn't expected. Bryce Howell, 40 years old, was not a single man looking for a fresh start with someone else's wife. Bryce Howell was married. His wife's name was Karen. They had a 9-year-old daughter. They lived in a suburb of Cleveland, about 2.5 hours north of us. He came to Columbus 2 or 3 times a month, ostensibly for work, as a regional sales rep for a building materials company. Donna thought she was running towards something real. She had no idea she was the other woman in her own affair. I wrote that down in the notebook I'd started keeping. Date, time, source. The same way I'd been trained to document incidents at work for 11 years. Every fact mattered. Every fact had a place. Wednesday morning I walked into Patricia Howe's office with a folder, a notebook, and a flash drive. She went through everything without expression, occasionally making a note, occasionally asking a question. When she finished, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. Mr. Lang, she said, you've done more preliminary work than most clients bring me after 3 months of trying. When do you want to file? When the time is right, I said. Not yet. She nodded slowly. Then keep doing exactly what you're doing. Ron Briggs had worked under me for 3 years. He was punctual, competent, and never caused problems on the floor, which was exactly why I'd always kept him at comfortable arm's length professionally. In security work, the people who never cause problems are sometimes the ones you watch most carefully. Trouble has a way of coming from the quiet corners. After what Frank had pulled from the audio recording, Donna mentioning Ron by name, as someone who was keeping her in the loop, I started paying attention to the quiet corner. I didn't change my behavior around him. That was critical. I still nodded at him in the corridor, still included him in shift briefings, still asked his opinion on minor floor decisions the way I always had. But now I was watching, and what I saw began to add up. Ron made personal calls on his break in the east stairwell, away from the cameras. I knew the blind spots in this building better than anyone, and that stairwell was one of them. He started showing up 5 minutes early on the days I came in, as if he wanted to be seen arriving before me. Small things. But in my line of work, small things are the whole job. On Thursday, I reviewed 2 weeks of access logs on the security office computer. Our system logged every login and every file accessed. Ron had pulled up my personal scheduling records twice in the past 3 weeks, the calendar that showed my long shifts, my days off, my coverage gaps. He had no operational reason to access those files. I printed the logs, dated them, and added them to my folder. Friday morning, I arranged a shift overlap with a part-timer named Chris, which gave me 40 minutes free in the middle of the day. I used those 40 minutes to stand near the east stairwell with a reason to be there, a routine inspection of the fire door mechanism, and I listened. Ron was on his phone. He kept his voice low, but the stairwell carried sound better than he knew. She's at the mall Wednesdays now, I think. Yeah, he extended his shift on Thursday, so, I don't know, she said just keep passing it along. I noted the time. I walked back to the office. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down every word I'd heard, verbatim, while it was still fresh. That evening I called Frank and gave him the update. You need to freeze that leak quietly, Frank said. You can't fire him. That tips Donna off that you're moving. But you can start feeding him wrong information. Put something plausible but false in your schedule, something she might act on. See what comes back. I thought about it for a day. Then I updated my shared scheduling calendar to show a fake overnight shift the following Tuesday, a 12-hour block that didn't exist. I told no one. I just let it sit there where Ron could find it. Tuesday night, I was home by 6. I parked down the street, walked back, and let myself in through the side door. Donna's car was in the driveway. She was on her phone in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice. She stopped when she heard me come in. "I thought you had an overnight," she said, her composure holding but her eyes sharpening. "Shift got covered," I said simply, setting my keys on the counter. "What's for dinner?" She stared at me for a half second too long. Then she said, "I was just about to start something," and turned to the stove. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the kitchen with the same calm I brought to every shift. The trap had worked. Ron had pulled the schedule. He'd passed it to Donna, and Donna had made a phone call, or canceled the plan, based on a shift that never existed. Now I had a confirmed loop. Ron to Donna to Bryce. The whole triangle laid out clean. I ate dinner with my family that night. I helped Lily with her spelling words after. I watched the end of a game with Cooper before bed. And when the house was quiet, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a new page. Evidence. Complete. Proceed. Patricia Howe's number was already in my phone. In the morning, I was going to call her with a date. Patricia Howe had told me to keep collecting and stay quiet. I was good at both. But the call I got on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into all this, wasn't something I planned for a scene coming. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Gary." The voice was older, careful. "This is Norma, Donna's mother." I walked out onto the back porch and closed the door behind me. Cooper had the TV on in the living room. Lily was already asleep. "Norma," I said, "this is a surprise." "I imagine it is." She paused. The kind of pause that means someone is deciding how much to say. I'm going to get straight to the point because I don't have the patience for anything else at my age. I know what my daughter is doing. I've known for a while, and I want you to understand that I don't approve of it. Not one bit. I leaned against the porch railing and said nothing. In my line of work, silence is the best way to let someone keep talking. She left her iPad at my house 2 weeks ago. Norma continued. I wasn't snooping. It was sitting on my kitchen counter, and a message came up on the screen. From a man named Bryce. Another pause. I read enough to understand the situation. "Norma," I started. "Let me finish," she said firmly. "I have 2 grandchildren in that house. Cooper and Lily didn't choose any of this, and they don't deserve to be caught in the middle of whatever game Donna is playing. I raised my daughter better than this, and I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and pretend I don't see it." I exhaled slowly. "What are you offering, Norma?" "I have screenshots," she said. I took them before I gave the iPad back. 3 separate conversations between Donna and this Bryce person. They talk about money, Gary. About accounts. About timing. She paused once more. "I'll send them to you tonight if you give me your email. And I want your word that those children are going to be looked after properly." "You have my word," I said. "That's the only thing I'm fighting for." The screenshots arrived 40 minutes later. I forwarded them directly to Patricia Howe with a brief message. "New evidence. Sources credible. Details tomorrow." Then I sat at the kitchen table and read through them 3 times. Donna and Bryce had been coordinating for months. The screenshots covered conversations spanning 6 weeks, and they referenced the account, a phrase that appeared 4 times, along with specific dollar amounts that matched withdrawals I'd already documented from our joint savings. In one exchange, Donna wrote, "Linda says we move on the filing after the holidays. Keep the December trip quiet." Linda. That was Linda Farr, Donna's attorney, which meant Donna had already retained legal counsel without telling me. She had a lawyer, a plan, a timeline, and a getaway trip booked, and she'd been walking around our house every evening like everything was normal. I met with Patricia the next morning and handed her the printed screenshots. She studied each one carefully. "These are significant," Patricia said. "Combined with the financial records and the airline tickets, we have a clear pattern of coordinated deception. I want to file for emergency temporary custody before she does anything else." She looked up at me. "The sooner we move, the less room she has to maneuver." "Do it," I said. That afternoon, walking back to my car from Patricia's office, I called Frank. "It's moving," I told him. "How are you holding up?" Frank asked. I thought about it honestly. "I'm fine," I said. "Angry but fine. The anger's useful right now." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Earl know anything yet?" My father, 75 years old, living alone in the house he'd raised me, and over in Gehenna. Sharp as a tack and twice as stubborn. Not yet, I said. But he will soon. The emergency custody hearing was set for a Thursday. Patricia had moved fast. I gave her credit for that. By Wednesday evening, I had the kids' bags packed and in the trunk of my car. I told Cooper and Lily we were going on a short trip to Grandpa Earl's, that Mom had some things to take care of at home. Cooper gave me a long look. He was 13, old enough to feel the undercurrent, but he nodded and helped his sister with her backpack. Earl lived in a 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in Gehenna, 20 minutes from our house. I called him from the driveway before we left. Dad, I said, I need to bring the kids to you for a few days. I'll explain everything when I get there. Drive safe, was all Earl said. That was my father in a nutshell. No drama, no unnecessary questions. He'd been a machinist for 31 years. He understood that some things needed doing before they needed explaining. When we pulled up, Earl was already on the front porch in his flannel shirt despite the November chill. He hugged both kids without a word about why they were there, told Lily he'd bought the good cereal, and asked Cooper if he wanted to see the new woodworking project in the garage. Just like that, the tension in the car dissolved. That was Earl's gift. He made space feel safe without making a production of it. I helped settle the kids, then stood with my father in the kitchen while they got themselves sorted in the back bedroom. Donna, he asked. Yeah, I said. He nodded once. He didn't ask for details. He just poured us both a cup of coffee and sat down at the table the same way he'd sat at that table through 30 years of problems. Steady, unhurried, present. Those kids go to be all right, he asked. That's what I'm working on, I told him. He nodded again. That was enough for Earl. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse for the hearing. Patricia was already there, composed and prepared, her folder organized, and her expression neutral in that way that told me she'd done this 100 times. Donna arrived with Linda 12 minutes later. Donna looked polished but tense. There was something behind her eyes I recognized from years of watching people under pressure at work. She hadn't expected this timeline. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Patricia laid out the evidence methodically, the financial records, the airline tickets to Tampa, the screenshots Norma had provided, and a signed statement from Frank regarding the surveillance findings. Linda pushed back on the surveillance angle, arguing admissibility, but the judge, a composed woman in her mid-50s named Judge Calloway, listened to both sides without expression and then spoke. The court finds sufficient grounds to grant temporary sole physical custody to Mr. Lang pending a full hearing, she said. Mrs. Lang will have scheduled visitation, supervised for the time, being given the circumstances presented. Donna stood up halfway. Linda touched her arm to keep her seated. This is not the final determination, Judge Calloway continued, looking directly at Donna. But I would strongly advise all parties to conduct themselves accordingly in the interim. Outside in the corridor afterward, Donna moved toward me with Linda, a half step behind. Her voice was low and tight. You really think you can just take them from me, Gary? They're my children. I looked at her calmly. They're our children. And right now the court agrees with me that they need stability. That's not a punishment, Donna. That's a consequence. She stared at me. Something flickered in her expression. Not guilt exactly, but something in that neighborhood. You should have just accepted things, she said. The same words she'd used the night she walked out the door dressed for Bryce. I know you believe that, I said quietly. That's always been the difference between us. I turned and walked back toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Linda say something to Donna in a low voice, and I heard Donna's response, a short, sharp exhale that wasn't quite a word. I pushed through the courthouse doors into the cold November air, got into my car, and drove to my father's house to pick up my kids. Life has a way of forcing you into situations you didn't plan for. I'd spent weeks building a careful, methodical case, documents organized, attorney briefed, every move calculated. What I hadn't calculated was running into Bryce Howell on a Saturday morning in the cereal aisle of the Kroger on Stelzer Road. I recognized him immediately from the photo Frank had pulled. 40 years old, medium build, wearing a gray fleece jacket and holding a box of granola like he didn't have a care in the world. He was looking at his phone when I walked around the end of the aisle with my cart. He looked up. For a half second, neither of us moved. He knew who I was. I could see it in the way his expression shifted. A quick recalibration, The kind people do when they get caught somewhere they'd rather not be caught. He opened his mouth slightly, closed it, then tried for casual. Hey, he said. I stopped my cart about 4 feet from him. I looked at him the way I'd looked at shoplifters for 11 years. Steady, patient, without hostility. Just watching. Bryce, I said. Not a question. He straightened up slightly. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm not here for trouble, I said, keeping my voice low and even. I'm here for cereal. I paused just long enough. But since we're standing here, you should know that everything you and Donna planned is already on a judge's desk. The Tampa tickets, the account transfers, all of it. I held his gaze. Whatever you thought you were building with her, you might want to think carefully about whether it's still worth building. He stared at me. His jaw tightened, then loosened. He was trying to figure out what move to make and coming up empty. I didn't want it to go this way, he said finally, his voice lower now. I know you didn't, I said. Nobody ever does. I pushed my car past him and kept moving down the aisle. I didn't look back. My hand was steady on the cart handle, my breathing even. The anger was there. It was always there underneath, but I'd learned to use it as fuel instead of fire. You don't win anything by exploding. You win by being the last man standing when the dust settles. I texted Frank from the parking lot. Ran in a howl at Kroger. Said my piece. No incident. Frank replied with a single word, good. That afternoon, Donna called my cell. The kids were at Earl's for the weekend, a new routine we'd settled into since the hearing, and I was at home going through paperwork at the kitchen table. You spoke to Bryce, she said. Her voice had that particular tone she used when she was managing her anger in public. Controlled but pressurized. I did, I said. You had no right. I ran into him at the grocery store, Donna. I said a few words and kept shopping. Check with your attorney about whether that's a problem. I paused. While you're at it, ask her about the Tampa flight reservation. Patricia filed a motion this morning referencing it as evidence of intent to relocate the children without consent. That might be worth discussing. Silence on the line. Long enough that I thought she might have hung up. You think you're so far ahead of me, she said finally. Her voice had dropped to something quieter and harder. I'm not trying to be ahead of you, I said. I'm trying to protect Cooper and Lily. That's the only race I'm running. She ended the call without another word. I set the phone on the table and went back to my paperwork. 2 days later, Donna did something I hadn't anticipated. She showed up at my parents' house, Earl's place in Gahanna, on a Monday afternoon while the kids were at school. I wasn't there. Earl called me afterward. She came to the door. He told me, his voice measured. Wanted to see if the kids were here. I told her they were at school, and she already knew that. He paused. She started in about how you'd taken everything from her, and she just wanted her family back. What did you say, Dad? I told her, Earl said slowly, that a family doesn't leave on its own. It gets left. And then I told her my son would be in touch through his attorney, and I closed the door. I held the phone and let that sit for a moment. 75 years old, and still the steadiest man I knew. Thanks, Dad, I said. Drive careful, he replied, and hung up. That evening I relayed the visit to Patricia Howe. She noted it, added it to the file, and told me make sure the kids' school had documentation of the custody arrangement, so Donna couldn't attempt anything similar there. I called the school first thing the next morning and spoke to the principal personally. Certified copies of the custody order were in the school's system by noon. I was learning to stay 3 steps ahead. After 23 years of watching other people's blind spots for a living, I was finally applying it where it mattered most. The full custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in early December, 3 weeks before the Tampa flight Donna had booked and apparently not yet canceled. Patricia told me that was significant. The fact that the reservation still existed strengthened the relocation without consent argument considerably. I wore my good charcoal suit, the same one I'd worn to Cooper's school award ceremony 2 years ago. It still fit. I drove to the courthouse alone, parked 2 blocks away, and walked in with my folder and a clear head. The courtroom was larger than the one we'd been in for the emergency hearing. More formal, more people. Donna was already seated when I arrived, Linda far beside her in a dark blazer. Donna had dressed carefully, a navy outfit, hair neat, expression composed. She looked like someone trying very hard to look like the person she wasn't anymore. Patricia had prepared me well for what to expect. Linda Farr's strategy, Patricia had told me, was going to center on 2 things: painting the surveillance as a violation of Donna's privacy and autonomy, and introducing the concept of emotional control, arguing that Gary Lang had spent years keeping his wife financially dependent and psychologically constrained. I had to hand it to Linda Farr. She billed it reasonably well. She spoke about Donna's limited access to financial accounts, her feeling of being monitored and managed in the marriage, the power imbalance of living with a man whose professional background was in surveillance and security. She was smooth and practiced, and I watched several people in the gallery nodding slightly. Then Patricia stood up. She started with the bank records. 14 months of systematic withdrawals from the joint account, totaling just over $14,000, made exclusively on days when Gary Lang worked long shifts. She laid the timeline on the table like a series of photographs, each one clicking into place. Then came the airline tickets. Patricia explained the Tampa reservation, 2 passengers, December 19th, and the duffel bag found in the garage. The men's shoes, the cash, the envelope. She noted that December 19th fell 6 days before Christmas, when the children would normally expect to be home with both parents. Then came Norma's screenshots. Patricia presented them carefully, establishing Norma's credibility. A 69-year-old woman with no stake in the proceedings beyond the welfare of her grandchildren, who had come forward voluntarily. The screenshots showed a coordinated financial plan between Donna and Bryce spanning 6 weeks, including the phrase Linda says we move on the filing after the holidays, which drew a visible reaction from Judge Calloway. Linda Farr objected twice during this section. Both objections were noted and overruled. When Patricia addressed the surveillance directly, she framed it with the precision I'd come to expect from her. A man with professional training in documentation and observation, watching his own household, using equipment obtained legally, responding to a reasonable and well-founded suspicion of financial fraud. Not a violation. An act of protection. Judge Calloway asked several questions during the presentation. Focused, specific questions about the financial timeline, about the children's school schedules, about the existing temporary custody arrangement's effect on the children's daily lives. Patricia answered each one cleanly. Then it was Donna's turn on the stand. She held herself well for the first 15 minutes. Composed answers, careful phrasing, everything Linda Farr had coached her on. But when Patricia began cross-examination and started walking through the specific dates on the bank withdrawal records, asking Donna to confirm each one, the composure began to develop hairline fractures. In this withdrawal of $1,800 on October 3rd, Patricia said, her voice entirely conversational, "You made that withdrawal?" "Yes," Donna said. "For household expenses. Can you provide receipts for those household expenses?" A pause. "I don't keep every receipt." "Of course," Patricia said. "And the withdrawal on September 9th? Also household expenses?" "Yes." "And the one on August 21st? The pauses between Donna's answers grew slightly longer each time. By the 6th withdrawal, Linda Farr interjected with a procedural objection that the judge allowed briefly before Patricia resumed. By the time Patricia finished, the picture was complete. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just methodical and clear, the way real evidence works. Judge Calloway's ruling came 40 minutes after closing statements. Sole physical custody to Gary Lang. Structured visitation for Donna, unsupervised, on alternating weekends once a family counselor cleared the arrangement. The Tampa reservation flagged as evidence of potential flight risk. Donna's travel outside Ohio to require prior court approval for the duration of proceedings. And a formal referral to the county prosecutor's office regarding the financial records. Not a verdict, not a charge, just a referral. But it meant someone else was now looking at those 14 months of withdrawals with official eyes. Donna said nothing after the ruling. She sat very still while Linda Farr made notes beside her. I didn't look at her for long, just long enough to see that the certainty she'd carried since the night she walked out in her green dress was finally, visibly gone. Outside in the corridor, Patricia shook my hand once. "Well done," she said simply. I nodded, picked up my folder, walked out into the cold December air, and called Earl to tell him I was coming to get the kids. The weeks between the custody hearing and Christmas were the strangest of my adult life. On the surface, things looked almost normal. Kids in school, dinner on the table, lights on the house because Cooper had asked if we were still doing the outside lights this year, and I'd said yes without hesitation. Underneath, the machinery of consequences was turning steadily, and there was nothing Donna or Linda Farr could do to slow it down. Donna had filed a countermotion 2 weeks after the custody ruling, seeking to have the surveillance evidence thrown out and the custody order revisited. Linda Farr argued it with everything she had: the privacy angle, the professional background angle, the power imbalance argument. She tried at the full hearing. Patricia dismantled it piece by piece over 2 sessions, and Judge Calloway denied the motion on a Thursday afternoon without much deliberation. That same week, the county prosecutor's office made contact regarding the joint account withdrawals. Patricia had been expecting this. A detective named Hargrove left me a voicemail, professional and neutral in tone, asking me to come in at my convenience to review the financial records I'd submitted. I went in on a Friday morning, brought my complete documentation folder, and answered every question clearly and directly. Hargrove was thorough. He took copies of everything and told me they'd be in touch. I didn't hear from them again for 3 weeks. But the process had been set in motion, and that was what mattered. Linda Farr tried one more maneuver in early December, a motion arguing that Gary Lang's profession gave him an unfair advantage in building a surveillance-based case, that his training had essentially allowed him to construct a narrative rather than document a reality. It was creative, I'll give her that. Patricia called me after receiving the filing, and I could hear the controlled amusement in her voice. "She's running out of road," Patricia said. "This one won't stick." It didn't. What I hadn't anticipated was the afternoon Donna called me. Not through her attorney. Not about logistics, just called, the way she used to when we were first married and she'd phone from the salon between clients just to talk. It was a Tuesday. The kids were at school. "I know this doesn't change anything," she said. Her voice sounded different, scraped clean of the confidence it had carried all autumn. "But I need to say it. I handled everything wrong. All of it." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Donna, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "I know it's too late for that. I saw what you said to Cooper last weekend, when he asked you why everything had to change. I was dropping them off, and I heard you through the window. You told him that some things change, but the parts that matter stay the same." She paused. I couldn't have said that. I don't think I would have thought to say that. I was quiet for a moment. There was a part of me, not a large part, but an honest one, that felt the weight of 18 years in that phone call. The years before it went wrong. The woman she'd been before she decided she deserved something different than what we'd built. "The kids love you, Donna," I said. "That doesn't go away. What you do with it from here, that's up to you." She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, quietly, "I know." We hung up. I sat at the table for a while. Then I got up, rinsed my coffee cup, and went to check the outdoor lights. 2 of the strands had gone out on the left side of the house, and I'd been meaning to fix them for 3 days. Bryce Howell quietly fell out of the picture around the same time. Frank confirmed it. No more contact between him and Donna. No more visits to Columbus that he could trace. Whether his wife in Cleveland had found out, or whether the legal proceedings had simply made everything too complicated, I didn't know and didn't particularly need to. He was gone. Whatever Donna had believed she was running toward had dissolved the way those things usually do when the circumstances stop being easy. Ron Briggs resigned from Millbrook Square the second week of December. He gave 2 weeks' notice and said it was for personal reasons. I accepted the resignation professionally, thanked him for his years of service, and didn't say another word about it. He knew what I knew. Saying it out loud would have helped neither of us. The referral to the prosecutor's office remained open as the year ended. Patricia told me these things moved slowly and that I shouldn't expect resolution quickly. I wasn't looking for resolution. I was looking at my kids eating breakfast on a Saturday morning with the winter sun coming through the kitchen window, and that was the only resolution I needed right now. 14 months after that October night, when Donna walked out the door in her green dress and told me I'd always just accepted things, I was sitting on the cold aluminum bleachers of a middle school gymnasium watching Cooper play in a basketball tournament. He'd joined the team in September. I'd driven him to every practice and every game since. Lily sat beside me on the bleachers with a thermos of hot chocolate I'd packed, her boots kicking rhythmically against the seat below as she watched her brother. She'd been doing that leg-swinging thing since she was 3 years old. I hoped she never stopped. Cooper brought the ball up the court, got screened, found a teammate on the wing. The teammate missed the shot. Cooper grabbed the rebound himself, all elbows and determination, and put it back up off the glass. It dropped in. The small crowd made noise. Lily grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" she demanded. I saw it, I said. In the 14 months since the full hearing, the machinery had kept turning at its own pace. Donna's visitation had progressed from supervised to unsupervised once the family counselor cleared it, which took 4 months and required Donna to complete a financial responsibility course the court had ordered as a condition. She'd done it without complaint, which Patricia told me was a good sign. I chose to believe that too. The county prosecutor's office had issued a formal finding on the joint account withdrawals 8 months ago. Donna had reached a civil settlement, restitution of $11,000, repaid in installments, with a suspended sentence contingent on full compliance. No jail time. I hadn't asked for jail time. I'd asked for my money back and for accountability. The legal system, slowly and imperfectly, had delivered both. Ron Briggs had moved to another city. I'd heard through mutual contact that he was working retail management somewhere in Indiana. I didn't think about him often. Bryce Howell had, as far as Frank could determine, returned to his life in Cleveland. Whether his wife knew about Columbus, I had no way of knowing and no interest in finding out. That wasn't my story. 3 months ago, Donna had sat across from me at a coffee shop. Her suggestion, a neutral location, and we talked for the first time like two people trying to figure out how to be decent to each other for the sake of 2 kids who hadn't chosen any of this. It wasn't easy. It wasn't warm. But it was honest, and honest was something I could work with. She'd looked at me across the table and said, "I know what I threw away. I know that now." I'd looked back at her and said, "What matters is what you build from here." For them. She nodded. I'd paid for both coffees and driven home. Frank had taken on a new case and didn't need my updates anymore. Earl had developed a habit of watching Cooper's games on a live stream I set up for my phone. He'd never quite mastered streaming apps on his own, so I called him beforehand and walked him through it each time. He'd text me after, single sentences like "good rebound in the 3rd quarter" or "kids got good hands." That was Earl. That was enough. Lily finished her hot chocolate, set the thermos between us on the bleachers, and leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. She did that sometimes now. A quick lean, not looking for anything, just touching base the way kids do when the world feels steady enough to take for granted. I put my arm around her for a moment. Watched Cooper set up on defense, his face focused and serious in the way it got when he was locked in. A year ago, I'd stood in an empty kitchen wondering how the floor had dropped out from under everything I'd built. I'd spent 18 years in a marriage that turned out to be half invention, 2 months documenting a betrayal I hadn't wanted to find, and 14 months rebuilding something smaller and sturdier on ground I actually owned. I wasn't the man Donna had counted on staying in place. I wasn't the man who just accepted things. I was the man on the bleachers on a Saturday, and there was nowhere on earth I would have rather been.